Hi everyone. Today we'll speak about Gno.land, which is not Gnosis. So Gno.land is a new ecosystem in the Cosmos IBC ecosystem of interconnected blockchains. It specializes on smart contracting. And I will speak about what we plan to do, not technically, but what it will bring. So new open source paradigm. And I will speak about GitHub, open source, but it goes beyond. It's about GitLab, GitHub, Git, open source, free software, etc. So first, what is Gno? Gno is a new smart contracting ecosystem, including blockchain, Gno.land, a language, Gno.lang, a VM, Gno VM, and a set of tools so that you can build your contract, you can run new blockchains, not a single one. You can deploy your own Gno VM-based chain and interact both internally and between blockchains. It was created by Jae Kwon, the co-founder of Cosmos and co-creator of Tendermint. And it's still in testnet, sorry, but yeah, it's an L1 that you can reuse right now that will be deployed later this year or at the beginning of next year, with the goal to launch new blockchains by yourself and also let people bootstrap their own chains and interconnect them together. It's built on Tendermint 2, a new evolution of Tendermint, which is way more simple, built to create very long-term blockchains, so blockchains for 20, 50, or 100 years, with a very low maintenance. And it's secured by proof of contribution, which is a new algorithm, so like proof of stake, but replacing finance with the contribution. So yeah, it's designed a lot about simplicity, finishing products, and having things you can use without any fear of deprecation or high maintenance. It integrates GnoWeb, which is a way to write dApps without requiring an external server, so that it's not just about providing the API for wallets, but also providing ways for your users to read, interact, and just see the contract as on the web. So one of the main things that allow us to consider that we can change a little bit how open source will work is because the language itself is a multi-user language, which is clearly a new paradigm, and it's mainly due because we are interpreting the scripts, interpreting the contract, interpreting the programs. So instead of writing on your computer, publishing on GitHub, then compiling to a bytecode that you publish on a chain, you publish your contract, your libraries, everything, and they are both usable as a wallet, with a wallet in terms of interaction, but also importable by other contracts. So each time you create a new contract, it's available as an application, like an app store, and as a library, so that people can use your contract, its source code, its structures, its state, and interact with it. The goal is to create a multi-user programming language that also works outside of a blockchain, but the main goal of having such a system is to have the highest level of trust, which goes in pair with having a blockchain behind. But basically, the language is multi-user, and with a blockchain, it creates like an open source concept where you can only create new knowledge, new features for you, your users, and the rest of the developers. The main difference between a multi-user programming language and smart contracts or systems interacting like microservices is the fact that you don't upload the bytecode, but the source, and the source is importable. So instead of having to call an address and provide some primitive types parameters, you import the other contract. You can use whatever you want in the same language. You can use structures, nested structures, arrays, new types. You can also use the state, the data of what you call, and you can interact with it. If an helper you call is changing the imported contract, the state will be persisted in the uploaded contract. And for instance, the source code you can see is about importing JRC20, an equivalent of ERC20 that manages just balances and addresses, and users, which is an equivalent of ENS. And this contract, which was uploaded after provides on-chain support to transfer tokens to an handle, to a username. And here, we just import the contracts. You can use the methods, the type, the structure, the pointers, whatever you want. And as you can see, we can also look up using the whole ENS state, the data, and you can also interact with Foo20 to transfer the data, to change the balance. And by doing this, you have imports, and then you make as many interaction you want. It's not about making an expensive call or 10 expensive calls. It's about making a single import and making potentially thousands of queries or writes. So another concept of multi-user programming is the fact that you don't upload binaries but source. So instead of interacting with an API, Facebook, AWS, whatever, Twitter, and sometimes have the source code on GitHub, so two different systems. Here you always have access to the source code, so it's not possible to not do open source, actually. It's about publishing the source code usable by wallets, by other libraries and programs, but also just for users to discover. So something very common for developers on GitHub. On GitHub, you discover a project, you read the README, you can inspect the source code, and it's a discovery process. And we bring the same. You explore your blockchain, your dApps, and you can read the source code, read the imports, you can navigate between the imports, you can have all of the data. As on GitHub, you can see the dependencies and consider if you can trust them or not. So yeah, by doing this, you just make access to the source code mandatory, meaning that you don't need to provide a decompiled version of your bytecode, an IPFS link, or whatever. It's the same process. You don't switch from GitHub to the dApp to the production, or from the production to the dApp, to GitHub, sorry. It's about being in the same bubble. And Gno.land, so it will be one of the chains running GNOVM, but it will be special because we want it to store most of the good quality libraries and apps that you can use in the GNO ecosystem. So this is more an application responsibility more than a technical responsibility. Any GNOVM chain can have contracts, but we want to promote this chain to host, like GitHub hosts the source code, like NPM hosts the libraries on JavaScript. We want Gno.land to be the chain owning all the good quality contracts that you can import on any chain or on Gno.land. By doing this, we want to give actually the same effect as GitHub today. When you want to start a new project and you depend on, I don't know, you want to interact with Twitter or MySQL or whatever, you will look for your library, for a dependency to import. And we want to give the same, where you can explore, choose, and just pick the best dependency you want. And once again, still by staying in the same ecosystem. It's not the source on one side, the production on another. It's the same system. You navigate. It's a loop. You navigate. You like. You fork. You compose. You read. You write. You extend. Whatever. And yeah, by doing this, it's about having this loop. Like you are on a contract. You like something you want to automate. You write a shell script. No, it's actually you write your own small contract just to interact your way with the contract instead of making wallet transactions. So by doing this, we want to give many, many more metadata information, so high level of transparency, making switching back to other Web3 ecosystem or even Web 2 looks like I miss something. I miss the source code, I miss the proof that the deployed version is the same version as a good version of GitHub. So yeah, it's unified and it makes a huge difference. As for GitHub or other projects like Radical, etc., the goal is to also bring the social aspect of GitHub. So not only the code, but who are the authors, the organizations, seeing the network between things, following people, trusting people based on their history. So all the social aspect of GitHub, which goes far beyond just source code sharing. So yeah, if you remember the arrival of GitHub, it didn't create open source. Open source was existing before, but if today you remove GitHub, GitLab, etc., open source will be a way harder. It will be less smooth. The goal is to just create a similar similar effect where we don't invent open source, we don't invent a smart contract, we don't invent execution or whatever, but by putting them together, it's an unified experience, and when you leave this, you always feel, oh, maybe the source code is outdated, or I need to trust a developer, a company, an infrastructure. So yeah, the goal is to make a A to Z trust chain. You can trust the execution, the source, and everything. The goal is to also provide something additional. GitHub is about sharing source code, and production is about having the execution and the state. On GitHub, you don't have the state. The goal is to provide a new way where the state of a program, the data, is as open as open source software. Maybe some data are private to a contract, meaning that you cannot, as a non-admin, update them. But the thing is about, it's always possible to get this data with an indexer or whatever. So here we want to unify source code and state. You can read whatever private variable you want. You can synchronize everything locally, so you can just maybe create a new contract, depend on ENS, but already have all the ENS state locally when you develop. So you create an ENS. From day one, it's available as an ENS connect for everyone, every developers. And you can do this for everything. You just don't ship features, you ship features and state. So yeah, by doing this, by providing source code by default, state, and by being around a new language, something we can do is to provide the usual way of interacting with smart contracts, with wallets and clients. We can provide a new way for discovering contracts, reading contracts, auditing contracts, thanks to the source code. But since we are around a new language, since we interpret everything and we can import something, we can also create a wallet, which won't be just about calling a method with parameters, but about executing arbitrary code as you were a contract. You are a contract, except you don't persist yourself on the chain. You just have an address which is known, you have your assets, but you can basically have a shell which is pure programming language. You import something, you print the value, you interact with it, and each time it's about writing, it will create a transaction. Each time it's about reading, it will just get the data without any transaction. Let's think about transparency. The goal is to name everything. Instead of having 0x something for the contract for the users, we want users to be able to have a handle. They can stay anonymous, but they can reserve a handle, and they can publish their contract with a handle, like on GitHub. And a last important part of Gno.land is that it will run proof of contribution, which is technically something everyone can run, but it's harder to run than proof of stake. You don't have to just find validators to bootstrap your network. You need to invest time and energy to monitor who were the contributors during the build phase. So we will do it thanks to interconnectivity. Proof of contribution and its DAO will be available for other chains. So you can expect to have a reliable, financial independent consensus and DAO that you can run everywhere. But yeah, thanks to this proof of contribution, we want not only to change the target of the rewards to not only financial people, but also contributors. We want to give money to good contract developers. We want to create something where building open source is good. Building good open source can pay your bills. So the goal is to promote something where it's not us, it's not a grant, it's just the community will use your good code, and by using your good code, you will be rewarded. So yeah, we want to promote something where the chain is protected by its contributor, it's owned and secured by proof of contribution, but also as a developer, which is not developing blockchains, but just contracts, you can expect to earn rewards by writing good code. And so it's not just about a language, it's reinventing the open source. So the concept of open source was to share just the source. Here we want to add the state and the execution, and also we want to break this concept of splitting on one side we have Git, GitHub, and the development. Then you build, and then you have the production world. We want to make something where you have a short loop. You use the contract, you want to change something, automate for your own need, you want to fork the contract or whatever. It's the same loop on the same system. So it's about, on a daily basis, creating small scripts, small extension, without too much pressure, because it's more about writing a shell script. It's not about making a huge new application and audit for months. So yeah, it's about having the same open source ethos, but for including the execution, the trust, and sharing everything like in open source. So it's about amplifying open source. We don't want to compete. We still need open source, standard open source as of today, but we want to create an additional open source ecosystem on the side where you still push code. It's not repository, it's contract, where every day you have a portfolio which is growing, and where every day you can enrich your own account, your own developer portfolio, your own network of trusted people. So every day is about, it's yesterday, but better. And the goal is to basically try to do the same effect GitHub made by transforming something which was already existing. The open source was existing, but GitHub changed it a lot. We want to make basically the same, where when you leave Gno.land, you feel like I'm not sure about everything. I need to synchronize the data. I need to trust. I need to verify, etc. No, we want to make something more live. You have all the data you use, you fork, you edit. It's about a live experience. So yeah, before GitHub, after GitHub. We want to make the same before Gno.land, after Gno.land. So it's about bringing more social stuff to smart contracts, more transparency, more trust, putting the developers and the contributors in front of the public with more rewards, with a name, with a social profile, a portfolio of what they are doing. Sorry, I already said this. So basically, create a loop, which is clearly what I want to insist, because it's not just about technical stuff or a language. It's about the loop you have with open source, but forcing you to switch between what you see on your browser, finding the project on GitHub, forking, publishing somewhere else. It's about creating a shorter loop, encouraging to have open source and without the option to create closed source stuff. So maybe you won't be compatible if you want to keep secrets, but if you embrace the extreme transparency concept of Web3 that can come with Web3, this will be potentially the best ecosystem. So we are currently in testnet. You can join us to try to use or to help us finish the project. We currently have a Game of Frames competition, which is a way to both contribute, earn points right now, and rewards in Atom. And the day we will release the mainnet, you will be in the Genesis as a member of the evaluation DAO, which is actually the one who will own the blockchain. So by contributing right now, you can help us start earning points, convert the points into reward, but keep them for the Genesis. And to finish, feel free to check out the GitHub, the website, and help us create Game of Frames, both by participating or extending the competition, and contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Manfred. That was informative. Guys, anybody has any questions? Yes. So I'll give it to you first.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for the talk. Could you elaborate a bit on how proof of contribution works? Like, my concern is if we're rewarded based just on number of commits, it encourages low value commits. But if we want to judge the quality, that's kind of not very automatable. It requires human judgment. How do you approach this issue?
So that's the bold thing, evaluation DAO. The evaluation DAO will be the thing allowing us to give points without relying on a dictator. So basically, we want a DAO where people are owning the blockchain and sharing their own points. They are diluting themselves by giving points to new contributors. And by doing this, they will basically dilute themselves and receive less rewards over time, but they will protect the blockchain. So we replace the dictator, the one allocating points, with a DAO. And you have basically a standard system like in open source where you have leaders approving commits. So it will be different. You can have commits on one side, and then there is like a forum where you discuss and you try to negotiate. I want more point, less point. Your commit is useful, useless, etc. It can be automated, but by default, it's free. It's about discussing.
Yeah. In terms of putting the code up to the nodes, are you compiling it then on your end, or is it like just in time compiled?
It's interpreted. We have a proof of concept. We have two proof of concept with a different interpreter and with something creating some bytecode at the last moment. Yeah. But by default, right now, we parse the GNO code. We have a GoAST, and the GoAST is executed directly without a bytecode.
So do you provide a version then? I'm just seeing it's like 3 years down the line and you're on version 4 of your compiler and like safe math happened in Solidity. Like how would you guarantee that the bytecode that you write just in time is the same bytecode like 45 years from now when no one has the old compilers?
So there is no bytecode except in one proof of concept, and this bytecode is deterministic. But with the current main runtime, we don't have bytecode, and it's deterministic. The language is deterministic, and the GNO VM is basically configuring the language so that the execution is deterministic. For instance, the map can be random, but with always the same seed, which is decided in a consensus round. So at the end, everything is deterministic in the language, both the parsing and the whole execution from A to Z.
Okay, so it's like on Chrome, it's like V8 or whatever for JavaScript. So like when you go from V8 to V9, for example, it's guaranteed to be the exact same program you're running.
Yeah, and that's why it's a new language, actually. It's based on Go. It looks like Go, but it's not Go. It's Go for Web3. It's a deterministic Go, interpreted Go. It does not exist out of there. And so it has some constraints right now. We don't have Go routine yet. We plan to have them later. But at the end, it's a new language that is just compatible with the same parsing. Okay, and I guess quickly, console.log or print line, can you print every single type? Not all the types, most of them. And as soon as you create structures with, yeah, basically most of them. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, good. I assume because you have this comparison to GitHub, so that I have commits and updates to the libraries or the contracts that I publish. So does that mean that all contracts are upgradable by default? And how do you handle the versioning if I want to import an older version of a library that is out there and not the new one because I'm not happy with the changes or whatever? Right now, we don't have versioning built-in methods, so we have good practices. We have in plan to create migration features or versioning-oriented features. Right now, we want people to be able to make crappy work, but we also encourage people to basically create good libraries. And we have a distinction between libraries only and applications. So basically, we have an app store and an NPM. And the NPM thing will never have a way to version your stuff. If you want to version, it's you just name it V1, V2, V3, because we consider that the dependency you use right now, it can have new features, but if it has a bug, the goal is not just to update the dependency, it's to maybe update it and redeploy a new contract. So we'll have migration features for the applications people can use, and we consider the library part like a pure stuff. It's pure, it's there, you use it or you don't use it, but we don't plan to have versioning inside. It's about encouraging to have smaller things, audit them, or maybe wait for them to be used for years before using them. So when you deploy a contract, these libraries get all bundled with it together and not referenced and then downloaded by the node. Sorry? If you deploy a contract that imports a library or an app, or so it gets bundled in together and then published with the app within the code, or does every time when this contract gets executed, it gets the app from the library?
No, when you upload something, we will verify all the imports. So if your contract imports libraries, they need to be uploaded before. And libraries can only import libraries. It's the pure world stay pure. The application world can import other applications or pure libraries. And maybe it will change, but right now we want to have one world which is about providing new features, updates for the users, and one world like NPM, but where each version stay forever. And maybe you can deprecate it, but we won't remove it. We won't change it. We won't patch the source code without asking.
Okay, thanks.
Just for clarity on that, like the difference between NPM and PNPM is that it basically links to a cache of like the library that you're importing. So it just wasn't clear to me that, like, are you just in time importing the library, or are you just like basically making copies of the same code for every single one?
So just for this here, each blockchain should have the code locally. When we'll have multi-chain, one of the new code we will create is fetch source through the consensus through Web3 to just fetch locally the source. Right now, the plan is to have multi-chain mostly for source and maybe later for data transfers, so to create like microservices around multiple blockchains. Right now, we want to focus on you have good source code, you want to import it, it will be cached forever on the new blockchain. The import path will look like the other blockchain, but technically it will be a local version. The goal, when I put the example with the two imports, the goal is to prepare the VM, load everything, and then if the load was successful, we execute. So when you have a microservice, when you have a call on Ethereum, it can fail. You can have a failure when you try to call an address that does not exist, for instance. Or microservice, you need to open a socket, a gRPC, whatever. Here, we import all the source code, we restore the state, and then we execute. There is no, you don't have if import was successful. You don't have if my call was successful. The call can fail if the logic returns an error. But here, we import everything, we load everything, and then we execute. So you need to have everything locally before launching.
Okay.
So and just so that we can make bytecode later, right now we have something without bytecode, and maybe at some point we'll have optimizations with bytecode just in time or other runtimes. But by default, we don't need. By default, we have only source code.
Okay, so so in very simple terms, how does it differentiate from Radical or Gitopia?
So we are not a Git provider. The common point is the thing about providing more than the source code with social features, metadata. But here we have a production. It's like you mix Ethereum with GitHub. So not GitHub in Web3. You mix the execution part, the transactions, the relationship between basically the blockchain and the source code together. And you also have this part of basically the social aspect of GitHub with the source code, with the execution. So it's not just about sharing source code, it's about by default you execute something and then, you have an option to see the source, to fork, to do all the stuff you do on GitHub. But it's mainly a production system, an execution system. It provides the Git features as a bonus, which is actually, we cannot remove from the project, but it's mainly a production system.
Right. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Manfred.